Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dave Zukowski, the Director of Defense Solutions at Akamai Defense. Dave, thanks for joining me.
Hey, welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, Dave, certainly there has been a lot of progress towards zero trust over the past year. Let's level set a little bit and understand where you think the progress has been, how much progress has been made, and what still needs to be done for agencies and departments to largely get toward a zero trust state of compliance.
That's a really good question. And one of the words you just used is the one that makes it interesting. You said compliance. The challenge we have, and when we look at forward progress, is compliance often detracts from security sometimes. We look at the black and whites and we go for checkboxes instead of actually digging into the intent of the requirements and getting to real security solutions. So I think the progress this year has been mostly on the understanding side. When zero trust came out, it's like any other buzzword, service-oriented architecture, zero trust, all this new fun, scary stuff. What all the departments, I think, started to realize is, hey, we've got a lot of the foundational underpinnings already in place. We've got stuff we've been doing. We're starting to understand what the tenets are of zero trust, continuously monitor, continuously authorize, all the things that make up what zero trust is meant to be. And they started getting away from the architectural and product like drives. Like there were a lot of product vendors that came in and said, hey, buy this, it's zero trust. And the reality is zero trust is an architectural set of patterns. And as the departments have started to realize that and kind of get through the marketing spin, they're putting these roadmaps together and they're realizing where they already are and where they're trying to get to. And I think that's been the bulk of the progress, is really that greater understanding of what zero trust is and how they actually go about approaching it.
Okay, well, let's drill into that progress made a little bit further here, because it seems from the outside here that there's been very little structural change to what agencies have actually done to implement zero trust. Do you agree that's what we're seeing here? And if so, is that a problem? Is that an issue? Is that a concern for you?
So let's take a commercial equivalent to help answer that. If you look at Google, who's got the Beyond Corp, case study, and you understand what Google is as a company and how they operate. They had one CIO, they had very centralized direction, they had a plan, and their plan was rather simple when you boil it down. They said, we're going to forget our existing networks, we're going to create this new target environment, and we're going to migrate everything into that environment, and we're going to kill things by attrition as they get in there. The whole company had to get on board in order to do that, right? So structurally, they were built for that because they had a central point of direction. When you look at the departments, and I was an airman, so when you look at the departments and how intra-competitive each organization is, it doesn't lend itself to that same style of attack, right? Like, you have intramural squadron games, you've got competitions all over the place. There's just an inherent level of competition built into the structural foundations of what the departments are. And then there's competitions for money, and there's competitions for attention at the congressional level. So structurally, they have to get to a point where, hey, we can compete, but we should be competing together, right? Like we should be competing to fight the enemy, not necessarily ourselves. And that, unfortunately, there's still some of that problem built in there, is because zero trust is a holistic architecture, right? We've got teams in place that are working on one part of it, but in order for their part to work, they're relying on 3 or 4 other parts. Rather than work with the team that's doing those 3 or 4 other parts, they start building them out themselves. And what we end up with is some pretty significant overlap. So we've got to find a better way as a department to get sort of at a much more structural high level and kind of kill some of that competition between the programs and focus that competition externally.
This is one of those things where what gets measured is what matters here. And, I think this goes especially for zero trust. How have you seen departments measure the progress and the success that they're accomplishing in this zero trust journey? And, do you think there are other metrics at play here that they should be focusing on as they move towards zero trust?
Yes, that's a good one. Measurement in general drives behavior. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to drive the wrong behaviors. I'm reminded of a story from communist Russia, right? When they had to do quotas, and one of the quotas was how much wood they used. And what ended up happening is they ended up with these gigantic doors made up of like 6 feet and 4 feet thick of wood. It was crazy, but it was the intent is, hey, in order for us to get paid and eat, we've got to use all this wood. So they just wasted it and used it wherever. if we don't reflect on things like that, we may end up making the same uncomfortable decisions. The Air Force, the Army, for instance, there's hundreds of individual networks, right? If we're measuring the department of the Army or the Department of the Air Force at the top level of their maturity towards zero trust, without understanding their roadmap, right, we could look and say, hey, well, 99 out of your 100 networks are nowhere near compliant. And that could very well be okay because they don't want to touch those old legacy networks. But if we start driving that measurement, we force them to go into the legacy side and tear apart all those networks. We're going to detract from what their future state is. Again, go back to the Beyond Corp model. We're going to detract from them migrating into this newer, less trusted, more monitored environment, and instead waste our small dollars on trying to fix what we already know is broke. And that's the danger of measuring inappropriately. So I think the DoD as a whole is working on doing measurements, and I've been in some of the meetings. You know, they very specifically don't want to drive the wrong behavior, but I think they need to understand the architectural roadmaps more, and that each department is going to measure themselves differently, and that difference is going to matter greatly when you start rolling up these metrics, right? Like we've got to understand how they want to measure themselves, and then maybe translate that into some global metrics, but not have the top down. You know, what percentage of your whole network is zero trust compliant? Well, 5%, right? Well, you're being terrible. No, we're great. We're on time. We're on track. So that's kind of what I want to get at.
Yeah, different way of looking at things, a good perspective to have there. Like everything else, Dave, you know, these mandates, you can look at it as carrots and you can look at it as sticks. The sticks being they got to do it, but some carrots always are helpful to understand, you know, the why and how it's going to enable mission, how it's going to, you know, further the mission of the Defense Department, how it's going to enable the mission of the intelligence community, et cetera. Do you have any success stories of agencies implementing that roadmap successfully, and what ultimately the value proposition is of doing this in the first place?
Yeah, actually, one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. The Air Force has a very successful cloud managed service provider they call Cloud One. Cloud One was designed from the ground up to be zero trust. I'll use the word ready. Again, because it's an architectural journey. You know, they used all of the tenets of zero trust to build and design it and start migrating applications. What's been successful is, again, that kind of go back to that competition I was talking about. They undid the competition by providing centralized funding to do application migration. Part of that was to say, hey, system owner, we know you don't have the funding to both operate your current environment, you know, maintain your software updates for your current systems, and now we're asking you to migrate to the cloud, so drop everything you're doing. So starting with Bill Marion, follow forward with Lauren Knausenberger, there was a lot of centralized funding to do managed migrations. Unfortunately, some of that funding has fallen away. And again, this goes back to measurement, right? Like, we think wrong things got measured, budget got cut in the wrong places. But when that was centralized, what was happening is these programs now had a big carrot, in your words, right? They're, hey, we can get to the cloud and somebody else is going to pay for it for us. And what we did is part of that carrot was, hey, if you're going to come to the cloud, you're going to follow these enterprise rules. There's going to be ruthless governance at the top. And that's critical, right? That's that, again, that goes back to that Google model. Thou shalt follow these rules. And what's ended up happening is every system that thought they were snowflakes, right, has been melted into a lake of conformity and pulled into this environment. But part of that pull was now they're in line with these zero trust principles. Now, you know, they've got transactional monitoring on every system. They're on a standardized enterprise security tier. Cloud One has partnered with the Army on some of their security tiers. Like, there's a lot of goodness out of that centralized model, where it's also federated in that once the basic stuff is done for zero trust for all those applications, then the applications themselves have more control over what they do. So that carrot leads to them being able to control it, and then they're able to carry their budget back over into that environment. Now you've got these hundreds of systems in there that are all operating at the enterprise level, and it's pretty incredible when you see how it operates with minimal manning, basically at the enterprise tier for that.
All right. Well, Dave, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for all your thoughts here. It's really a lot to digest here. I'd like to thank today's guest, Dave Zukowski, the Director of Defense Solutions at Akamai Defense. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now, let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.